The latest figure from the Crime Survey for England and Wales revealed that there are 695,000 men who were violently abused by their female partner. Now, with most of us confined to our houses because of COVID-19, it is feared the problem could be even worse. But it is believed this is just the tip of the iceberg, with thousands of cases unreported as men find it a difficult topic to talk about. In this program, I will investigate the problem and talk to two victims who came close to death as a result of this abuse at the hands of their partners.
And she tried to push me.
I am on my way right now to England to meet a survivor of domestic abuse to share his story about his experience living with a violent woman and how it impacted on his life. Robert Wells was in a relationship with his ex-partner for 4 years. He became used to regular violent abuse from her. Even he didn't expect it to happen as he tried to save his baby daughter from choking.
So she's running around the house, or running around the kitchen. She is choking properly. You know, she's not just coughing, she's choking. So I said, give it to me, because I knew first aid. I took from her, and whilst I'm trying to clear her airway, out of nowhere, I'm hitting the side of the face with a heavy object, which was a fist. I staggered to one side, obviously pulls towards me. I didn't really know what had happened at first. And then there was just a sustained attack with a flurry of punches whilst I'm trying to clear away. After that, she blamed the stress of the moment and the tone in my voice when I'd asked her to hand over. So there was always an excuse for whatever she did.
Max Chadwick was also abused by his ex-partner and she nearly killed him. At first, he had no idea how violent she would become.
When she started breaking my head, and eventually she stabbed me, I think at that point I realised it, but then by then the police were involved. So when I was younger, I fell off a slide and I fractured my skull. That's all the pumpy stuff there. So she refractured it twice for me, so that was cool. Even though the doctor said, look, you know, you've got to be careful because you can die. There's a programme, and I can't remember what it was a science fiction programme. One of the ladies was really quite attractive. And I didn't make an issue of it. I just watched it. She goes, do you think that girl's attractive? And it's one of those trick questions. Fuck, and I'm thinking, I said, well, yeah, you're not as attractive as you, of course. And she went out the kitchen and got a frying pan and smacked me on the head from behind, and which knocked me out. And then she phoned the ambulance, so I woke up in hospital.
Both Max and Robert experience in domestic abuse forced them to move away from their homes.
So I had a job. I was the one, you know, providing the finances, and this was before Sophie was born. And one day I thought, I'm going to get killed. I need to get out of here. So I literally went down to travel agents and I booked a ticket to Australia because that's where my parents were.
Plus I was just so scared. Every time she had curly hair, lovely curly hair, a bit like yours but curly. And every time I saw her head like that, I'd jump. I thought I'd got to go. And I knew she couldn't find me in London, so I went up to London, lived up there. And then I got myself together and then came back.
A study showed that it is not about having enough services for men who have been abused, but how to encourage them to speak out.
Obviously, the two dominant findings that came from the study was actually the lack of recognition that exists for male victims. And when we think about that, it's not just the recognition of the fact that men can and are victims, but also the impact of that abuse as well. And then the second aspect then was the limited availability of provision. I mean, Wales, I think, are really well placed in the sense of, you know, certainly I think compared maybe to other areas of the UK. And I think the issue is not whether there's enough services or not. It's actually how do we get the men to sort of come forward who are experiencing domestic abuse. How do we instill in them the confidence that actually it's okay to be a victim. If they are experiencing domestic abuse, it's about them being able to accept and recognise that abuse and accept and realise that they need help. But there's lots of barriers around accessing those services as well.
Max and Rob explained what the police did when the abuse was reported. And it wasn't long before the violence became potentially deadly.
when she finally stabbed me. Obviously, up until that point, I had a couple of broken heads, punches, ornaments thrown. And then I can't remember what it was. It got really quite heated at one point, and I think I was sort of starting to stand up to her a little bit. And she went me with a knife. She stuck it in my leg. So I wrapped the towel around it, ran out of the house, got a taxi, went to the hospital, the local hospital where I lived.
And I said, "Oh, I've slipped," and they wouldn't. They just phoned the police straight away because any stabbings they do. And the police came, and he looked. He obviously looked at the records. He said, "Right." He said, "This has been going on for a long, long time." He said, "I'm going to tell you something now, Max." He said, "You leave or she'll kill you." That's why he left.
Every single time the police were called to an incident, whether it was by myself or by a neighbour, every single time I was treated as the perpetrator. I had the weekend, she was asleep in a cot, and brought a bottle of vodka and she brought some cocaine with her. And she said, "Mum won't let me drink at home since she moved up. So I'm going to have a few drinks here, is that alright?" Now I should have said no right at that second and go, "No, you need to leave." But I didn't. So I was like, "Right, okay, but I don't want you doing that in here, like the drugs." "Don't be a pussy." And then she drank almost a whole bottle of vodka. I asked her to leave. She exploded. First thing she grabbed was my laptop, just like that incident in my place here. Threw that across the room, ran across the room, started jumping up and down on it, stamping on it, pulling stuff off the sideboards. Obviously I'm like, get out, want you out. I'm taking me. He was asleep in the cot. I wasn't going to let her do that because of the state she was in. So I grabbed a phone, I dialed 999. She wrestled the phone off me while I was on the phone to the operator, and of course they're all recorded. I'm screaming for help down the phone. She manages to get the phone off me, she hangs up, and she's now using the phone to beat me around the face. I move to one side, she makes a dash for the bedroom. She goes to grab the cot, she's asleep in the cot. I grab her by her clothing, I pull her backwards, she falls to the floor. I grab her by the wrists and I pull her out of the bedroom, I close the bedroom door. And then stood in front of the bedroom door again, and again I'm getting the living crap kicked out of me. The police eventually turn up and we're both arrested. We're both taken to the police station along with the police. Come back into me, there's a man, and he sits down and he says, "Your partner's been very clever." He says, "She's refused to say anything." He said, "However," he said, "you've admitted assault." And I said, "When did I admit assault?" He said, "You stated to us that you grabbed her by the wrist and dragged her from the bedroom." And I said, "Yes, I did that as self-defence for my daughter." I said, "Because obviously she was lashing out at me, so I got hold of her wrist." I said, "Yeah, I dragged her out of the bedroom by her wrist." He said, "Well, that's assault." He said, "And therefore we're charging you with assault."
This incident had a big impact on Robert, which he tried to kill himself.
And I have to do what I can to help her. Begging, screaming for help. They turn up, there's not a mark on her, all of my face is smashed in. I've got cuts, grazing all over my face, and there's not a mark on her. How much more obvious does it need to be? Yet here I am, bailed for 5 months. Here I am spending my night in a police cell, in a courtroom. And it was in those 5 months that I put a rope around my neck. I stood there and I cried and cried and cried. I don't know how long I was stood there. And then there was the one point where I rocked the chair. That was it. As far as I was concerned, that was it. I rocked the chair, but the chair didn't go. And I screamed as I did it because I thought that was it. And then, of course, I'm standing there thinking, God, you can't even effing get that right,
So what stopped you?
My eldest daughter.
Okay.
Because she, at the time, she had the attitude that people who committed suicide were selfish. And I remember one time we were talking about it, and she'd said she could never forgive somebody who committed suicide.
A Welsh Assembly member had many walk into his office who have been abused by their partners.
If you're male, you're virtually on your own, and it's very, very difficult. I've had cases walk through the door where men have been beaten, there's continued abuse, and yet the police have not treated them as victims of domestic abuse. It's quite staggering, really. I think you're back in the dark old days of the 70s. Things have changed hugely for women to a great and good extent, thankfully. But with men, we're almost back in we're almost in the dark ages, really.
The director of two charities that support domestic abuse encouraged people to use Clare's Law, so they have the chance to know if the potential partners has a history of domestic violence.
The Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme, better known as Clare's Law, was put in place by the police to enable individuals to be able to access information about partners or potential partners if they had concerns about them being abusers or perpetrators of violence. The scheme is that you apply, there's an application form, you fill in the details. It can take up to 35 days for a return to come back with the information. The scheme also allows family members to make the application and close friends. So the information doesn't necessarily have to be applied for by the individual themselves.